Look at it. Really look at it. For centuries, we have called this world the jewel of the solar system. We put it on posters, in textbooks, and in the background of every child's dream of the stars. With its golden bands and that impossibly perfect halo of light, Saturn presents itself as the ultimate icon of celestial elegance. It looks peaceful. It looks regal. It looks untouchable. But beauty is the ultimate trap. In the world of high-stakes cosmic survival, Saturn is not a jewel. It is the solar system's most photogenic predator. Every single thing you think you know about this planet is a polished lie, a decorative mask designed to hide a reality so violent and so fundamentally wrong that it defies every instinct we have about what a planet should be. Most documentaries will tell you that Saturn is a gas giant with beautiful rings. They are lying to you by omission. The deeper truth, the one buried in the most recent 2026 mission science updates and the darker corners of cosmic theory, is that Saturn is a kingdom of counterfeits. It is a world where every serious fact becomes uglier and more terrifying the closer you look. Think about the silhouette. That perfect symmetrical sphere we see in telescopes is an illusion. Saturn is spinning so fast, one full rotation every 10.5 hours, that it is literally flattening itself. It is a ball of hydrogen and helium under such immense dynamical stress that it bulges at its center like a pumpkin being crushed from above and below. It isn't a stable world. It is a pressurized engine on the verge of a structural tantrum. And then there is the surface, or rather, the lack of one. We are used to planets having a where. You can stand on Mars, you can land on Venus, even if only for a few minutes before you're melted. But you cannot land on Saturn. There is no shore. There is no ground. If you were to descend into those golden clouds, you would find a fake surface that leads to an infinite, crushing void. As you fall, the gas doesn't just get thicker, it transitions into a liquid metal ocean without ever hitting a boundary. You aren't landing. You are being incorporated into a gradient of pressure that dissolves rock into oblivion. For decades, textbooks told us that Saturn had a solid core, a neat ball of rock and ice, sitting at the center like a pit inside a peach. We liked that idea because it made sense. It gave the planet a heart. But the most recent data from the Cassini mission, analysed by researchers at Caltech, has shattered that comfort. Saturn has what scientists now call a fuzzy core. It isn't a solid object. It is a smeared, sloshing mess of heavy elements dissolving upward into the hydrogen, extending out to 60% of the planet's radius. It is an unruly, unsettled interior that quivers like a bell when struck, creating waves in the rings that act as a planetary seismograph. The heart of Saturn isn't a solid foundation. It's a sloshing abyss of liquid metal and ghost matter. But the physical horror is only the first layer of the lie. The most successful documentaries on this niche often play you the sounds of Saturn, those eerie wind-like whistles and metallic shrieks captured by radio instruments. They tell you it's just magnetospheric interaction. They're missing the deeper, more unsettling mystery. When you listen to those sonified radio emissions, you aren't just hearing the screams of a planet. According to the most provocative theories in the Law Vault, you might be listening to a broadcast. This is the Saturn-Moon matrix theory, the idea that the planet isn't a passive object, but an active transmitter of limitation. While competitors focus on the science of the noise, they ignore the terrifying possibility that these frequencies are a soul trap broadcast, a cosmic frequency designed to anchor the material illusion of our solar system. Whether you believe the fringe metaphysics or not, the scientific reality is no less haunting. Saturn broadcasts radio waves that are so powerful, so persistent, and so structured that they defy standard atmospheric models. It is a world that screams into the void 24/7, and we are only just beginning to realize that the signal might be directed. Then we have to talk about the entourage. As of 2026, the official moon count has spiked again, pushing the total to over 146 confirmed worlds. Most people hear that and think it's just a fun trivia fact. It isn't. This isn't a family of moons. It's an unruly kingdom with too many rooms to search. It is a moon graveyard where Saturn is constantly capturing, breaking, and rearranging its victims. Every time we look, we find more irregular moons, captured asteroids and refugees from the Kuiper Belt, trapped in distant, tilted orbits. Saturn is a collector of cosmic debris, a hoarder of broken worlds that it uses to decorate its own vanity. Even the rings, the very crown that makes us love this planet, are a crime scene. We see them as jewellery, but the science tells us they are wreckage. They are the scattered guts of a dead moon, possibly several, that wandered too close and crossed the Roche limit. Saturn didn't grow those rings. It murdered a world to get them. It stripped the crust from a living body and ground it into trillions of icy fragments to create a temporary ornament. And the word temporary is the key. The rings are dying. They are falling into the planet as ring rain, a process that is devouring the crown at a rate that would fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 30 minutes. We are witnessing a snapshot of a catastrophe. We are looking at a predator that is currently eating its own finery. This is the polished lie of Saturn. We call it the jewel of the solar system because the alternative is too much to handle. The alternative is a world with no bottom, a heart made of sloshing liquid metal, and a kingdom built on the remains of the dead. It is a planet that mimics a peaceful icon while hiding a hurricane at its pole that could swallow 2 Earths whole and a radio signal that sounds like the universe is trying to warn us. As we move deeper into this investigation, we're going to peel back the gold leaf. We're going to look past the counterfeit Earth of Titan and the moon that bleeds at Enceladus. We're going to go where the original videos were too afraid to go, into the heart of the beautiful trap. Because the closer you get to Saturn, the more you realise that the scream we hear in the radio data isn't just noise. It's a signature, and it's much, much worse than you think. We've spent centuries admiring the silhouette. Now it's time to look at the predator behind the mask. Welcome to Chapter 1. Welcome to the end of the lie. Listen to that. That isn't a Hollywood sound effect. That isn't a synthesized track meant to unsettle you for a jump scare. What you're hearing is the raw, sonified radio emissions of Saturn, captured by the Cassini spacecraft as it danced through the planet's magnetosphere. It is a sound that has haunted researchers for decades. They call it Saturn kilometric radiation, or SKR. To the engineers at NASA, it is a data point, a measurement of electrons spiraling along magnetic field lines. But to anyone listening with their eyes closed, it sounds like something much more ancient. It sounds like a scream, or perhaps more accurately, it sounds like a broadcast. In the first chapter, we talked about the polished lie of Saturn's appearance. But if the rings are a visual decoy, the radio emissions are the planet's true voice. And this voice is telling a story that the standard documentaries are too afraid to touch. While most creators will play you a few seconds of this space music and tell you it's just the planet's magnetic field interacting with solar winds, they're ignoring the most unsettling question in modern planetary science. Why is this signal so structured? And more importantly, who or what is it for? To understand the horror of the frequency of fear, you have to understand the scale of the magnetosphere. Saturn's magnetic field is a colossus, hundreds of times more powerful than Earth's. It creates a bubble of influence that stretches for millions of miles, engulfing its 146 moons in a permanent, invisible electrical storm. Inside this bubble, particles are accelerated to near-light speeds, crashing into each other in a region scientists call a magnetic war zone. On Earth, our magnetic field protects us. On Saturn, the magnetosphere is a weapon. It's a shredder for any charged particle that wanders too close. But here is where the science takes a sharp turn into the unknown. Most planets have a magnetic field that is tilted, a bit off-center compared to their rotation. Earth's is tilted, Jupiter's is tilted. This tilt creates a wobble that scientists can use to measure how fast the planet is spinning. But Saturn is different. Its magnetic field is almost perfectly aligned with its axis of rotation. It is too perfect. This axial symmetry is a scientific anomaly that challenges our entire understanding of how planetary dynamos work. Because the field is so perfectly aligned, the radio signal it emits doesn't just sound like static. It has a rhythm, it has a pulse, it has a signature. This brings us to the first massive law gap that most mainstream science ignores: the metaphysical broadcaster theory. If Saturn were just a ball of gas, its radio emission should be a chaotic mess of white noise. Instead, we find a signal that is so persistent and so structured that a growing number of theorists, and even some fringe researchers, have begun to ask if Saturn is actually a transmitter. In the law vault of cosmic mysteries, this is known as the Saturn-Moon matrix. The theory suggests that Saturn isn't just a planet, but a massive celestial machine, a soul trap broadcaster. The idea is that these radio frequencies we're hearing aren't a byproduct of atmospheric friction, but a deliberate broadcast of limitation. According to this narrative, Saturn acts as the solar system's central processing unit, broadcasting a frequency that anchors the material illusion we call reality. It's the frequency of fear because it operates on a level that our biological systems recognize as a boundary. It is the sound of the cage bars. Think about the way these sounds make you feel. There is a reason the human brain translates these specific electromagnetic waves into a sense of dread. It's not just the creepy factor, it's the structural nature of the sound. It sounds like a machine talking to itself. And when you look at the 2026 updates to Saturn's moon count, now reaching 146, the matrix theory gains a darker dimension. Theorists suggest that the moons of Saturn aren't just orbiting rocks, they are relays. Each moon, from the massive Titan to the tiny, jagged irregulars captured from the Kuiper belt, acts as a satellite dish, focusing and amplifying the planet's broadcast. But if it's a broadcast, what is the message? This is the new mystery that the original Outlier videos missed. They focused on the how, but they never asked the why. If Saturn is broadcasting a material illusion, then the solar system isn't a collection of planets, it's a network. In this framework, the moon orbiting our Earth isn't just a natural satellite, it's a relay station for the Saturnian signal. This creates a matrix that keeps the inhabitants of the inner solar system locked into a specific frequency of consciousness, one defined by time, decay, and the material world. It is no coincidence that in ancient mythology, Saturn was Kronos, the god of time, the one who devours his own children. He is the one who sets the limits. He is the one who defines the end. Now let's ground this back in the terrifying science. Remember the fuzzy core we discovered in Chapter 1? Scientists at Caltech realized that Saturn quivers like a bell being struck, and those oscillations create waves in the rings. Those waves are essentially a physical readout of the planet's internal frequencies. Saturn is literally vibrating with power, and that vibration is so intense it reshapes the very matter orbiting it. When you combine the physical vibration of the fuzzy core with the electromagnetic broadcast of the magnetosphere, you get a world that is singing in both matter and energy. Ask yourself, is Saturn screaming in pain, or is it broadcasting an order? If you look at the North Pole hexagon, a geometric shape that defies every law of fluid dynamics, you see the result of this broadcast. On Earth, we use antennas to send signals. On Saturn, the entire planet is the antenna. The hexagon is the speaker where the internal frequencies of the planet manifest as a perfect six-sided geometric scar. Nature doesn't make straight lines, but machines do. Programs do. If Saturn is a kingdom of counterfeits, as we've proposed, then the frequency of fear is the software that keeps the counterfeit running. It is the reason we see a jewel when we should see a predator. It is the reason we see jewelry when we should see the wreckage of a murder scene. The radio emissions are the planet's way of syncing the rest of the solar system to its own violent, decaying rhythm. Most people want to believe that space is silent. They want to believe that the vacuum is a peaceful void. But Cassini proved that the space around Saturn is loud. It is crowded with signals that we are only just beginning to decode. And the more we decode them, the less they sound like natural phenomena. They sound like an entity with agency. They sound like a world that knows it is being watched and is responding with a signal designed to keep the watcher at a distance. As we move forward into the storm-racked atmosphere and the geometric nightmares of the North Pole, keep this sound in the back of your mind. Because the hexagon isn't just a weather pattern, and the great white spots aren't just storms. They are the physical symptoms of a world that is vibrating at the frequency of fear. You are listening to the sound of a planet that does not care about your survival, and quite possibly a planet that is actively working to ensure you never see past the polished lie of its beauty. Is it a scream? Is it a broadcast? Or is it something even worse? Is it the sound of a world that has been running an experiment on us for 4 billion years? We've heard the signal. Now it's time to look at the machine that's sending it. It's time to descend toward the North Pole. It's time to face the shape that shouldn't exist. Nature does not make straight lines. This is the first rule of the wild. From the spiral of a galaxy to the curve of a human iris, from the meandering path of a river to the circular fury of a hurricane, the universe speaks in curves. In a fluid, chaotic atmosphere made of swirling hydrogen and helium, geometry is supposed to be impossible. You expect eddies, you expect plumes, you expect the ragged, beautiful mess of a storm. But then you arrive at the North Pole of Saturn, and there, etched into the very fabric of the planet, is a shape that has no business at existing in the natural world. It is a perfect, six-sided polygon. A hexagon so precise, so massive, and so persistent that it challenges every law of fluid dynamics we've ever written. Each of its 6 sides is roughly 9,000 miles long, wider than the entire diameter of the Earth. Corner to corner, the structure spans 18,000 miles. You could drop 2 Earths inside this geometric boundary, and they would rattle around like marbles in a box. This is the North Pole hexagon, and it is the solar system's most forbidden shape. When NASA's Voyager spacecraft first glimpsed this feature in 1981, scientists were skeptical. They assumed it was a fluke of lighting or a temporary wave that would dissolve within weeks. But when Cassini arrived 25 years later, the hexagon hadn't moved. It hadn't blurred. It hadn't aged. It was spinning with the same eerie mechanical precision as the planet's deep interior, rotating once every 10 hours and 39 minutes. It wasn't just a weather pattern, it was an anchor. Mainstream documentaries will tell you that the hexagon is a jet stream. They'll point to laboratory experiments at Oxford, where researchers spun fluids in a tank and created brief unstable polygons. But they always leave out the catch. Those laboratory hexagons were fragile. They required perfectly controlled, artificial boundary conditions to exist for even a few minutes. Saturn has maintained its hexagon in a turbulent, convective furnace for at least 45 years, and likely for centuries. But the mystery goes deeper than the clouds. In 2018, a breakthrough study using Cassini's infrared data revealed something that the outlier videos completely missed. The hexagon isn't a flat feature on the cloud tops. It is a towering 3-dimensional column of structured atmosphere. As Saturn's northern hemisphere warmed into summer, scientists discovered a second identical hexagon forming high in the stratosphere. This means the hexagon is actually a massive geometric pillar extending over 300 kilometers deep into the planet. It is a towering cylinder of discipline punching through the chaos. This is where the science ends and the nightmare begins. Because if nature doesn't make straight lines, And if Saturn is a kingdom of counterfeits, we have to ask, why a hexagon? In the lore vault of ancient symbols and fringe theory, the hexagon holds a dark significance. When you look at a hexagon, you're actually looking at a two-dimensional projection of a three-dimensional object, a cube. If you connect the vertices of Saturn's North Pole storm, you aren't just looking at a polygon, you are looking at the silhouette of a black cube. Across human history and occult tradition, the black cube has served as a symbol of the material world, of density, and most importantly, of imprisonment. It is the symbol of Kronos, the Titan who, in Greek myth, devoured his own children to prevent them from surpassing him. Kronos, the god of time, who was eventually identified with the planet Saturn. To the ancients, Saturn was the old sun, or the black sun, the cold, distant ruler who defined the boundaries of our reality. When you link the Soul Trap radio broadcast from Chapter 2 to the black cube geometry of Chapter 3, the terrifying narrative of the Saturn-Moon matrix comes into focus. Theorists suggest that the hexagon is not a storm, but a monumental geometric antenna, a speaker for the broadcast. It is the physical stamp of the frequency that anchors our material illusion. The reason it is a cube is because the cube represents the ultimate limit. It is a three-dimensional prison. Think about what sits at the very center of this geometry. At the heart of the hexagon lies a massive polar vortex, a hurricane 50 times the size of any storm on Earth. In the high-resolution images, this vortex looks like a blood-red rose. Scientists call it the rose. But in the context of the black cube, this rose looks like a red, spinning maw, an unblinking eye staring out into the void from the center of a geometric cage. Why is there no hexagon at the South Pole? That is the question that haunts the mission data. The South Pole of Saturn has a massive hurricane, yes, but it is circular. It follows the rules of nature. The North Pole, however, refuses to conform. This asymmetry suggests that the hexagon is not an inherent property of the planet's atmosphere, but a specific program being run in the northern hemisphere. It is a geometric scar that never heals. If you were to fall into that red eye at the center of the hexagon, you wouldn't just be entering a storm, you would be entering the Tower of Discipline. You would pass through 300 kilometers of structured atmosphere where the winds are locked into hexagonal paths at 300 miles per hour. You would see smaller vortices, swept along like cogs in a machine, racing around the pole in an endless mathematical circuit. It wouldn't feel like a planet, it would feel like the interior of a colossal rotating engine. Nature is efficient, yes. We see hexagons in honeycombs and basalt columns because they are the most stable way to tile a surface. But nature is not rigid. Nature allows for growth, for decay, and for the messy interference of life. Saturn's hexagon allows for none of that. It is a shape that demands absolute compliance from the gas that passes through it. It is a window into the internal machinery of the planet, where the churning heat of the deep interior is stamped with a signature of control before it ever reaches the light of the sun. This is the forbidden shape because it tells us that the universe we see might be more constructed than we are willing to admit. It suggests that the beauty of Saturn is merely the skin of a machine that uses geometry and frequency to define the limits of its kingdom. We look at the hexagon and we see a curiosity. The ancients looked at the black cube of Saturn and they saw a god that demanded their time, their labor, and their souls. As we move deeper into the great white spots and the diamond rain of the interior, remember the shape at the pole, because everything that happens on this planet, the violence, the pressure, the wreckage of the rings, is being governed by a geometric discipline that should not exist. Saturn isn't just a world of gas and ice. It is a world of corners, and in a universe made of curves, a corner is a sign that you are no longer in the wild. You're in a cage. Welcome to the heart of the machine. Now that we've seen the shape of the prison, it's time to talk about what happens when the prisoner gets angry. It's time to face the storm that wraps around the world. It's time for the great white spot. For centuries, we have looked at the rings of Saturn and seen a crown. We've used them as the universal symbol for the beauty of the cosmos, a perfect, glowing halo that makes Saturn the undisputed jewel of our solar system. Through a telescope, they look smooth, solid, and eternal, as if the planet was born wearing this golden finery. But this is perhaps the most deceptive, polished lie of all. If you were to fly into that halo, you wouldn't find a polished surface. You would find a grinder. You would find yourself in a chaotic blizzard of trillions upon trillions of icy fragments, ranging from grains smaller than sand to jagged house-sized mountains of frozen water. The first thing you have to understand about the rings is their impossible geometry, what we call the math of the blade. The rings are vast beyond comprehension, stretching roughly 175,000 miles across, a distance nearly wide enough to span the gap between the Earth and the Moon. And yet, they are staggeringly, almost offensively thin. In most places, they are no more than 30 feet from top to bottom. To put that in perspective, if you scaled Saturn's rings down to the size of a football field, they would be thinner than a razor blade. They are a cosmic blade, a razor-thin disk of orbiting debris that slices through the darkness, held in a fragile, violent equilibrium. But the real horror isn't just how they look, it's where they came from. For decades, textbooks told us the rings were ancient relics, leftover scraps from the birth of the solar system 4.5 billion years ago. Cassini shattered that myth. By measuring the mass of the rings and the rate at which space dust pollutes them, scientists realized the rings are shockingly bright, as clean as fresh snow. If they were billions of years old, they should be filthy, darkened by eons of accumulated cosmic grime. Instead, they look brand new. The current evidence suggests the rings are only between 10 million and 100 million years old. This means that while dinosaurs were walking the Earth, Saturn had no rings. It was a plain, naked gas giant. So what happened? What could possibly create a structure this massive in such a short window of time? The answer is a tragedy. Mainstream science calls it the chrysalis hypothesis, but in the narrative of the Kingdom of Counterfeits, it is a murder scene. The theory suggests that Saturn once had an extra moon, a massive, icy world perhaps 400 kilometers in diameter, that researchers have named Chrysalis. For billions of years, Chrysalis orbited Saturn, helping to pull the planet's axis into its current 27-degree tilt. But roughly 100 million years ago, a series of gravitational resonances with the Sun and other moons destabilized Chrysalis's orbit. The moon began to drift inward, closer and closer to the giant. It was headed for the Roche limit, the invisible line of destruction. This is the boundary where a planet's tidal forces, the difference in gravity pulling on the near side of a moon versus the far side, exceed the internal gravity holding that moon together. When Chrysalis crossed that line, it didn't just crash, it was shredded. Saturn's gravity grabbed the moon and literally ripped the crust from the core. It was a celestial flaying. While the rocky core may have plummeted into the planet's depths, the icy outer layers were shattered into 17,000 trillion tons of debris. Within days, orbital motion flattened those scattered guts into the thin, rotating sheet we see today. The beautiful rings we admire are not jewelry. They are the forensic residue of a dead world. We are staring at a planetary graveyard. Even now, the violence hasn't stopped. Inside that graveyard, the debris is constantly colliding, shattering, and reforming in a state of permanent chaos. Larger fragments that survived the initial murder now act as shepherd moons, small jagged rocks like Pan and Daphnes that orbit within the gaps. But they aren't protectors, they are sculptors of wreckage. They act like cosmic snowplows, gathering dust and ice, carving out dark divisions, like the 3,000-mile-wide Cassini gap. They create ripples and towering ridges of debris that rise 200 meters into the air, casting long, haunting shadows across the ring plane. This is not a static structure. It is a dynamic, grinding machine of ice and bone. And here is the final, most unsettling truth. The rings are a temporary masterpiece. Saturn is not just the killer, it is the consumer. Even as we watch them, the rings are dying. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun and impacts from micrometeoroids give the ring particles an electrical charge. Once charged, they become slaves to Saturn's magnetic field, sliding along invisible lines of force and falling into the atmosphere. Scientists call this ring rain. Saturn is devouring its own crown at a rate that would fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 30 minutes. When you add the material spiraling directly into the equator, the loss rate is staggering. Roughly 10 tons of ring material every second is being swallowed by the planet. At this worst-case scenario rate, the rings could be gone in less than 100 million years, perhaps even much sooner. We are living in a narrow, privileged slice of cosmic time. We are the lucky witnesses to the aftermath of a catastrophe. In the long history of the solar system, the rings are a transient ornament, a brief shimmering window that opened recently and will close permanently. Future civilizations may look at Saturn and see nothing but a plain, lonely gas giant, indistinguishable from a smaller Jupiter. This is the blade and the burial. The rings are the most beautiful thing in our sky, but they are a warning. They remind us that in the kingdom of counterfeits, beauty is built on destruction, and even the most magnificent crown is just a temporary mask for a predator that eventually eats everything it creates. The jewel of the solar system is a world of corners and cages, and as the rings fall like rain into the dark, we are forced to realize that the majesty we see is really just the shimmering light on a crime scene. But if the rings are the evidence of what Saturn did to its children, the atmosphere is where the planet keeps its most violent secrets. And as we move from the graveyard of the rings into the clouds themselves, we're about to see what happens when the pressure finally breaks. It's time to face the storm that wraps around the world. It's time for the great white spot. Most of the time, if you look at Saturn through a telescope, it appears eerily serene. It wears bands of pale gold and butterscotch, orderly, horizontal layers of gas moving in a calm, rhythmic dance. Compared to the raging, turbulent mess of Jupiter's great red spot, Saturn looks like a planet that has found peace. But as we have learned, in this kingdom of counterfeits, silence does not mean peace. Silence means that the pressure is building. Silence means that the rage is being bottled up. Because roughly once every 30 Earth years, once per Saturnian year, this golden jewel goes to war with itself. It is a phenomenon scientists call the Great White Spot. But to the researchers who have watched the planet's atmosphere literally tear itself apart, it is known as the Great White Ghost. This is not a regional storm. This is not a local disturbance. It is a planetary detonation so vast that it wraps itself around the entire circumference of the world, turning the golden giant into a pale, flickering phantom of its former self. For over a century, astronomers have caught glimpses of this ghost. It was first spotted in 1876 by Asaph Hall, the man who discovered the moons of Mars. It appeared again in 1933, seen by a British comedian and amateur astronomer named Will Hay. It returned in 1960 and again in 1990, caught by the Hubble Space Telescope. But the most terrifying manifestation of this storm occurred in December of 2010, and this time we had a front row seat. The Cassini spacecraft was in orbit, and it watched as a small, innocent-looking white cloud, barely 800 miles across, erupted in the northern hemisphere. Within 3 weeks, that dot had exploded into a monster 10,000 miles wide. It didn't stop. Propelled by the planet's supersonic jet streams, a tail of white ammonia ice began to scream eastward. 12 weeks later, the tail had wrapped completely around the planet, stretching for hundreds of thousands of miles until the head of the storm literally collided with its own tail. It was a planetary-scale act of atmospheric cannibalism. For the better part of a year, Saturn ceased to be the jewel we recognize. It became a belt of churning, violent white clouds and electrical discharge that redefined our understanding of cosmic weather. But the real mystery isn't that the storm is big. The real mystery is why it takes 30 years to happen. Why does Saturn wait? Why does it look so calm for decades and then explode with the force of 1,000 Earth-sized hurricanes? The answer lies in a specialized mechanism that the original documentaries completely ignored: convective inhibition. To understand the Great White Ghost, you have to understand that Saturn is a pressure cooker with a locked lid. Deep inside the planet, there is water, massive amounts of it. In the intense heat and pressure of the interior, this water exists as vapor mixed with hydrogen and helium. But here is the catch: water vapor is significantly heavier than the surrounding hydrogen and helium. On Earth, warm, moist air rises easily to form clouds. But on Saturn, as the upper atmosphere cools, the water rains out of the top layers. This makes the upper atmosphere lighter and less dense than the layers below. This creates a density inversion. The light, dry upper layer acts like a literal lid, a cap of lighter gas that sits on top of the heavy, moisture-laden air below. This lid suppresses convection. It keeps the warm air trapped in the basement of the planet. For 30 years, the upper atmosphere of Saturn radiates its heat into the cold void of space, getting colder and colder while the energy in the depths continues to build. The planet is bottling up its rage. Eventually, the top layer becomes so cold and so dense that the lid finally breaks. The density inversion fails, and when it does, 30 years of trapped energy erupts all at once in a massive convective burst. Warm, moist air from the deep interior punches through the cloud deck like a volcanic eruption made of gas. As the water vapor rises, it condenses into massive towers of ice and ammonia that extend 20 times higher than any thunderstorm on Earth. This is why the storm looks white. It is fresh, brilliant ice being dredged up from the dark depths and displayed on the surface. And then comes the lightning. The electrical discharge within the Great White Ghost is unlike anything seen in our solar system. On Earth, a lightning bolt is a powerful event. On Saturn, during the 2010 storm, Cassini's instruments detected lightning flashing 10 times every single second. Each of those flashes released energy 10,000 times greater than a typical bolt on Earth. The radio and plasma wave instruments on the spacecraft recorded a crackling, hissing roar that lasted for months, a non-stop electrical barrage that pumped out power equivalent to the total solar energy the Earth receives in an entire year. This single storm was not just weather, it was a redistribution of the planet's internal heat. It was so powerful that it created stratospheric beacons, two massive blisters of heated gas that formed high above the storm. As these warm air masses drifted around the planet and merged, they created a temperature spike of 80 degrees Kelvin, the warmest spot ever recorded in Saturn's stratosphere. It even changed the planet's chemistry, producing ethylene, a hydrocarbon not usually found in such abundance, proving that the ghost doesn't just change how the planet looks, it changes what the planet is made of. But perhaps the most unsettling fact about the Great White Ghost is its timing. Based on the 30-year cycle, the next superstorm shouldn't have arrived until the late 2030s. But in 2018, ground-based telescopes saw something strange, a series of mid-sized storms near the North Pole. Some scientists believe this was a failed Great White Spot, a partial eruption, where the planet tried to break the lid and couldn't quite manage it. It suggests that the 2010 event was so violent, so draining, that the planet is still recovering. It is still recharging. This is the deeper terror of Saturn, the golden bands, the perfect rings, And the silent clouds are a mask. They are the polished lie. When you look at Saturn today, you aren't looking at a peaceful world. You're looking at a world that is currently cooling its upper atmosphere, thickening the lid, and waiting for the moment the density inversion fails again. Silence on Saturn is a countdown. The great white ghost is currently dormant, lurking in the liquid metal depths of the interior, waiting for its next 30-year anniversary to scream back into the light. And when it does, it will remind us once again that in this kingdom of counterfeits, the most beautiful silhouette in the sky is powered by a rage we are only just beginning to understand. But while the atmosphere is tearing itself apart, something else is happening nearly 1 billion miles away. On a moon that looks like a twin of our own, the great white ghost has a dark, frozen mirror. A world where it doesn't just storm once every 30 years, it rains constantly. But the rain isn't water, and the lakes aren't blue. It is time to leave the gas giant and land on the only moon that mimics the Earth to lure you into its trap. It is time for Titan. If you were to look out the window of a spacecraft approaching Saturn's largest moon, you might feel a sudden, jarring sense of relief. After weeks of staring at the airless, cratered husks of the solar system's other moons, you are finally seeing something familiar. You see a world wrapped in a thick, hazy atmosphere. You see a world with clouds, with weather, and with a surface pressure about 1.5 times that of Earth. From a distance, it looks like a twin. We have even called it that in our textbooks, Earth's twin. But as we peel back the layers of the Saturnian system, we realize the truth is much more sinister. Titan is not a twin. It is an Earth-shaped decoy. It is a counterfeit world designed to mimic the geometry of home, while using a chemistry that would shatter a human being like glass. This is the kingdom of counterfeits at its most deceptive. Titan is the only moon in the solar system with a substantial atmosphere, but that air is a toxic orange shroud of nitrogen and methane smog. For decades it was a locked box, a mystery wrapped in a photochemical haze that no telescope could pierce. It wasn't until the Huygens probe detached from Cassini in 2005 and began its 2.5-hour descent that we finally saw the face of the imposter. And what we saw was a nightmare of inversion. As Huygens drifted down through the orange sky, its cameras captured a landscape that shouldn't exist 1 billion miles from the sun. It saw drainage channels carving through highlands. It saw river systems branching across the terrain, flowing toward dark, flat lowlands. It saw coastlines and pebbles. It looked like a desert coastline on Earth. But when the probe finally touched down, the horror of the decoy was revealed. Those rounded pebbles weren't rocks. They were boulders of water ice, frozen so hard by the -180°C temperatures that they had become the geological bedrock of the moon. And the liquid that had carved those rivers wasn't water, it was liquid methane. On Titan, the fundamental machinery of a world is present, but the ingredients are lethally alien. We call this a rehearsal space for life, but it is a rehearsal taking place in a freezer where every rule of biology we know has been discarded. On Earth, we have a water cycle. On Titan, there is a methane cycle. Methane evaporates from the surface, forms massive clouds, and falls as rain. But rain on Titan is a slow-motion catastrophe. Because of the moon's low gravity and thick atmosphere, methane droplets fall slowly, like feathers. However, Titan's weather is defined by a terrifying convective inhibition, similar to the planet it orbits. The atmosphere can hold the equivalent of 10 meters of methane before it finally breaks. This means Titan suffers through decades, perhaps centuries, of absolute drought, only to be hit by a sudden, planet-altering downpour. When the rain comes to Titan, it doesn't just shower, it erupts in torrents, carving flash floods through the landscape and filling dry lake beds in a single, violent event. You are looking at a world that is essentially a desert made of fuel that stays dry for a lifetime before being drowned in liquid natural gas. And then there are the dunes. Across Titan's equator, vast fields of dark sand stretch for hundreds of miles, resembling the Sahara or the Namib Desert. But again, the decoy reveals its true nature under the microscope. This isn't silicate sand. These dunes are made of tholins, complex organic molecules produced in the upper atmosphere that settle to the ground like a fine dark snow. In the dry, frigid air of Titan, these organic grains are plastic in every sense of the word. They are hydrocarbons that have been processed by sunlight into a dark, static-charged soot. Because of the chemistry of this environment, these plastic dunes are incredibly sticky with static electricity. They don't just shift in the wind, they cling to one another and to anything that touches them. If you were to walk across the dunes of Titan, the ground wouldn't just give way, it would adhere to you, crackling with static discharge in the orange gloom. It is a world where the very soil is a synthetic byproduct of a toxic sky, shifting in alien winds under a permanent shroud of smog. The deeper you go into the northern hemisphere, the more the counterfeit Earth reveals its oceans. Cassini's radar discovered seas like Kraken Mare, larger than the Caspian Sea on Earth. These are not bodies of water. They are vast, silent reservoirs of liquid methane and ethane, essentially oceans of liquid natural gas. They are so cold and so pure that the radar could see straight to the bottom, hundreds of meters deep, where a sludge of heavy organic compounds settles into a thick, dark seabed. If you were to jump into one of these lakes, the thermal shock wouldn't just kill you. The extreme cold would turn your tissues into a brittle solid instantly. You wouldn't drown, you would shatter. This is why Titan is the ultimate anti-Earth. It mimics our rivers, our lakes and our clouds to lure us into the idea that it is habitable, while its actual environment is a masterclass in lethality. But the most provocative mystery, the one the mainstream videos missed, is what is happening in the rehearsal space. While we look for life in water, Titan suggests that nature might be running a parallel experiment in the dark. Astrobiologists have proposed that organisms on Titan could exist by consuming hydrogen from the atmosphere and reacting it with acetylene, producing methane as waste. In 2010, researchers analysed Cassini data and found something haunting. Hydrogen appears to be disappearing near the surface of Titan at a rate that standard chemistry cannot explain. It's as if something is breathing the atmosphere. Furthermore, researchers at Cornell have proposed a theoretical cell membrane called an azotosome, a structure made of acrylonitrile that could function and thrive in liquid methane, where our own lipid-based cells would simply dissolve. Titan is a rehearsal space for life that doesn't need us. It is a world that has all the ingredients for a biological engine: energy, liquids, and complex organics, but it has assembled them into a configuration that is utterly hostile to everything we are. It is a world swimming in more fuel than all the oil and gas reserves on Earth combined. A world that looks like a home but functions like a refinery. As we stand on the shores of Kraken Mare, looking out at the orange horizon, we realise that Saturn's jewel has many faces. Titan is the face of the imposter, the moon that tries to convince us that the universe is familiar, only to reveal a reality made of plastic dunes and liquid gas. But if Titan is the decoy that mimics the Earth, there is another moon nearby that does the opposite. A moon that looks like a sterile, frozen marble, but hides a secret that is far more alive than the smog of Titan. It is time to leave the counterfeit Earth and look at the moon that is actively bleeding into space. It is time for Enceladus. If Titan is the decoy that mimics the Earth, then Enceladus is the moon that lies with its silence. As we pull away from the orange smog of Titan and head deeper into the Saturnian system, we encounter a world that looks like the absolute definition of death. Enceladus is tiny, barely 300 miles across. You could drive its entire diameter in a few hours on a highway. It is a brilliant, blindingly white marble of ice, so reflective and so pristine that it looks as if it has never been touched by the chaos of the cosmos. For most of the history of astronomy, we ignored it. We thought it was just another frozen rock, a sterile husk orbiting the king of ghosts. But beauty, as we've learned, is the ultimate trap. Because Enceladus isn't just a moon, it is the moon that bleeds. In 2005, the Cassini spacecraft performed a flyby that should have been routine. Instead, it detected a disturbance in Saturn's magnetic field. Something was pushing back against the giant's influence. When the cameras turned toward the South Pole, the scientific community was silenced. From 4 massive parallel fractures, known as the tiger stripes, towering plumes of material were screaming into the vacuum of space. These aren't just small puffs of frost, they are supersonic jets of water vapor and ice crystals shooting hundreds of miles above the surface at 800 miles per hour. Enceladus is literally bleeding its interior into the void, feeding the entire E-ring of Saturn with its own substance. This was the first hint that the sterile surface was a mask. Gravity measurements and orbital vibrations soon confirmed the impossible. Beneath that blinding white crust lies a global liquid water ocean. It isn't a pocket or a melt zone. It is a sea that encircles the entire rocky core of the moon, hidden beneath 20 miles of ice. While the surface is a minus 200-degree wasteland, the interior is a warm, churning laboratory. But it's a laboratory that has been running in total darkness for geological ages. When we talk about searching for life, we usually look for worlds like the Earth, worlds that sit in the Goldilocks zone near a sun. But Enceladus doesn't need the sun. It has its own fire. Caught in a gravitational tug-of-war between Saturn and the moon Dione, Enceladus is kneaded like a ball of dough. This tidal heating generates friction and heat deep within its core. This heat powers a process called serpentinization, where hot water reacts with the rocky core to release molecular hydrogen. On Earth, this exact process creates the hydrothermal vents at the bottom of our oceans, the black smokers, where life thrives without a single ray of sunlight. These vents are not just geological features, they are biological engines, and Cassini proved that the exact same thing is happening inside Enceladus right now. It detected the hydrogen, it detected the salts, it detected the heat. But the most terrifying discovery didn't happen in 2005. It happened in 2025 with a massive reanalysis of the high-speed flyby data that the original outlier videos completely missed. When we look at the 2025 organic findings, the hidden laboratory narrative becomes undeniable. We aren't just finding simple methane or carbon dioxide in those plumes anymore. Scientists have now identified complex organic species, including aliphatic compounds, cyclic esters, and ethers. We have found nitrogen and oxygen-bearing molecules, the very building blocks of prebiotic chemistry. As Morgan Cable from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory famously noted, if you have all the ingredients for life, but no life yet, you should only have to wait about 10 million years before biology takes hold. The hydrothermal activity on Enceladus hasn't been running for 10 million years. According to the most recent estimates, it has been active for at least 40 million, and likely more than 100 million years. Think about that scale. While our ancestors were barely beginning to evolve, this hidden laboratory was already boiling. For 100 million years, in absolute crushing darkness, the chemistry of Enceladus has been running experiments. It has been mixing organics with mineral nutrients and chemical energy in a warm, sheltered ocean. It has had 10 times the amount of time needed for life to emerge, and it has done so in an environment that is shielded from the radiation and the impact chaos of the surface. This is what makes Enceladus the scariest moon in the system, the possibility that the experiment is already finished. We went to Saturn looking for gas and rings. We might have found a world that has been harboring our neighbors for eons. The fact that the moon is bleeding its ocean into space isn't just a curiosity, it is an invitation. Enceladus is literally offering its secrets to us, spraying its interior chemistry into the path of our spacecraft so we don't even have to drill. It is a moon that is begging to be understood, even as it warns us that we might not be alone in the dark. But if Enceladus is a laboratory for life, it is also a reminder of our own contamination. When Cassini's fuel ran low in 2017, NASA faced a terrifying ethical dilemma. The spacecraft was a hitchhiker from Earth, and it was carrying terrestrial microbes that might still be alive. If Cassini crashed into Enceladus, we could inadvertently seed that hidden ocean with Earth life, ruining 100 million years of independent evolution in a single afternoon. We had to destroy the messenger to protect the message. We had to order Cassini to commit suicide in Saturn's atmosphere to ensure the hidden laboratory remained pristine. Enceladus is a world of brilliant white ice that hides a dark, warm truth. It is a place where the rules of the inner solar system don't apply, where life doesn't need a star, and where the chemistry of the deep has had a 100 million year head start on us. It is a living world in a system of ghosts. But as we leave the moon that bleeds and return to the planet itself, we have to go deeper than the plumes. We have to go beyond the moons and the rings. We have to descend into the interior of the giant itself. Because if the moons are the laboratory, the planet is the forge. We are about to enter a realm where the laws of physics themselves begin to break. A place where hydrogen becomes metal and it rains diamonds in the dark. It is time to go inside. It is time for Chapter 8. For centuries we viewed Saturn's moons as a small, orderly court, a handful of icy attendants, following their golden king in a predictable dance. We gave them names from mythology and treated them like static curiosities. But as our technology has sharpened, the image of a neat planetary family has disintegrated. What we have found instead is a chaotic, sprawling, and deeply unsettling, unruly kingdom with too many rooms to search. If you were to look at a map of the Saturnian system today, you would see something that looks less like a solar system and more like a swarm. As of 2026, the official moon count has spiked to a staggering 146 confirmed worlds. This isn't just a trivia point for textbooks. It is a symptom of a planet that is an insatiable hoarder of cosmic wreckage. Most of these new discoveries aren't the large spherical moons we are used to. They are irregular moons, small, jagged and dark objects that orbit at impossible distances, often tilted at extreme angles or even moving backward against the rotation of the planet. To understand the kingdom of shadows, you have to understand that Saturn is a survivor of a multi-billion-year war fought with gravity. During the early chaos of the solar system, described by the Nice model, the giant planets didn't stay in their birthplaces. They migrated, fought for position, and scattered billions of icy bodies in every direction. Saturn, arriving second to the buffet after Jupiter, had to claim its throne through a process of gravitational natural selection. It didn't just form its moons, it captured them. It snagged refugees fleeing from the Kuiper Belt and the furthest reaches of the frost line, dragging them into its permanent dark embrace. This is why we call it the moon graveyard. When you look at the irregular moons, you aren't looking at natural satellites, you're looking at prisoners of war. Take, for instance, the moon Phoebe. Orbiting nearly 8 million miles away from Saturn, Phoebe is a dark, scarred relic that moves in a retrograde orbit, the opposite direction of the planet's spin. It is almost certainly a captured Kuiper Belt object, a visitor from the edge of the solar system that was trapped by Saturn's gravity eons ago. It is a fossil of the primordial universe, preserved in a cold, lonely orbit, a silent witness to the violence that shaped our neighbourhood. But as you move through the dark rooms of this kingdom, the moons only get stranger. There is Hyperion, a moon that looks less like a world and more like a giant, rotting sponge. Hyperion is so low in density, roughly half that of water, that it is essentially a loose rubble pile of ice and void. Because it is so porous, impacts don't create craters in the traditional sense. They compress the surface into deep, sharp-walled pits, making the moon look like it has been eaten from within. But the real horror of Hyperion is its mind. Unlike most moons that are tidally locked, Hyperion tumbles chaotically. Its rotation axis wanders unpredictably from orbit to orbit, driven by the gravitational bullying of the massive Titan. In a rigorous mathematical sense, it is impossible to predict which face Hyperion will show to the stars tomorrow. It is a moon that refuses to be known. Then there is Iapetus, the moon of the two-toned lie. Discovered in 1671, it baffled astronomers for centuries because it would vanish whenever it moved to one side of the planet. Cassini finally revealed why. Iapetus wears a mask of darkness. Its leading hemisphere is as black as coal, coated in organic-rich dust, likely swept up from the wreckage of other moons, while its trailing side is as white as fresh snow. But the mask isn't even the most disturbing part. Running almost perfectly along its equator is a mountain ridge, 13 kilometers high, taller than any peak on Earth, that stretches for 1,300 kilometers, like a jagged seam on a tennis ball. No one fully understands how it got there. Some think it's the remains of a collapsed ring system that once orbited the moon itself, falling onto the surface grain by grain until it formed a wall of ice. It is a monument to a catastrophe we weren't there to see. Even the moons that look normal are hiding secrets that challenge our understanding of death. Consider Mimas, the innermost major moon. It is famous for the Herschel crater, a massive impact scar that makes it look like the Death Star, an impact so violent it nearly shattered the moon into pieces. For decades, we thought Mimas was a dead, frozen ball of rock. But 2024 analysis of its orbital wobble suggests that beneath that ancient battered surface, Mimas might hide a global subsurface ocean. It is the ultimate counterfeit, a moon that presents the face of a dead, cratered husk while hiding a warm, liquid heart in the dark. This is the reality of the kingdom of shadows. Saturn is not a single world. It is a collector of 146 different ways to be terrified. Every time we look closer, the list of dark, unexplored rooms grows. We see Pan and Atlas, tiny moons orbiting inside the rings that have built skirts of ring debris, turning them into flying saucers of ice. We see Daphnis, an 8-kilometer-wide speck that carves literal waves into the rings as it passes, its gravity leaving a signature of ripples like a ghost moving through a curtain. The original documentaries on this niche focused on the beauty of the system, but they missed the narrative of the unruly kingdom. They treated the moon count as a high score. We treat it as a warning. Saturn has gathered a family of refugees, captives, and broken worlds, each one tucked away in a distant, tilted orbit where we can barely see them. It is a system built on gravitational theft, a hoarder's paradise where nothing that wanders too close is ever allowed to leave. When you look at Saturn through a telescope, you see the rings and perhaps the bright dot of Titan. But you are ignoring the other 145 worlds lurking in the shadows. You are ignoring the moon graveyard of irregular asteroids and the refugees from the Kuiper belt that have been stripped of their identity and pressed into service by the ringed giant. Saturn is the king of a kingdom that is far too large to be governed by the laws of order we want to believe in. It is a world of corners and cages, where even the moons are forced to wear masks or hide their oceans in the dark. And as we move from the shadows of the moons into the deep, incandescent heart of the planet itself, we will find that the unruly nature of the kingdom starts at the very center. It is time to enter the forge. It is time for the diamond rain and the metallic sea. It is time to see the planet that should not exist. We have spent this entire journey looking at the ornaments of the king, the rings, the moons, the storms. But now it is time to do the one thing every survival instinct in your body is screaming at you not to do. We are going to descend. We are going to leave the light of the sun behind and enter the interior abyss. Imagine you're falling. You enter the upper atmosphere at the cloud tops, where the temperature is a freezing minus 178 degrees Celsius. The skies are pale gold haze, filled with ammonia ice crystals drifting like toxic snow. As you fall, the golden bands stretch to every horizon, moving at different speeds, shearing past you with the force of 1,000 hurricanes. But you don't stop. You pass through the ammonia clouds, then the ammonium hydrosulfide, then the towering water ice clouds. The sunlight begins to thin, then yellow, then fail entirely. Within a few hundred kilometers, you are in total crushing darkness. But here is the first polished lie of the descent. You are waiting to hit the surface. You are waiting for that moment of impact, the sound of boots on rock, or a hull hitting water. It will never happen. On Saturn, there is no where. There is no shoreline. There is no edge. Because of the extreme physics of the gas giant, the transition from gas to liquid is continuous. As the temperature climbs toward 1,000 Kelvin and the pressure reaches 1,000 times that of Earth's sea level, the hydrogen gas doesn't just become an ocean, it simply thickens. It becomes a dense hot fluid without ever crossing a boundary. You aren't landing, you're being incorporated into a gradient of pressure that turns the atmosphere into a liquid abyss. By the time you reach halfway to the center, you have entered a realm that challenges the very definition of matter. The pressure here is 2 million bars, 2 million times the pressure of the world you left behind. The temperature has soared to 6,000 Kelvin, matching the blistering surface of the sun. In this incandescent heat, the hydrogen molecules themselves finally break. The bonds that hold atoms together are shattered. Electrons are stripped away and become free to move. Suddenly, you are no longer in an ocean of gas or liquid. You are swimming in a metallic sea. The hydrogen has become a liquid metal, behaving like molten lithium. It reflects light that isn't there and conducts electricity with terrifying efficiency. This is the planet's internal dynamo, a sloshing, rotating sea of liquid metal that generates the massive magnetic field we discussed in Chapter 2. But unlike Earth, where the magnetic field is tilted and messy, Saturn's metallic sea is so perfectly aligned that the field is almost symmetrical. It is a too-perfect machine, smoothed out by a layer of helium rain that acts as a filter, absorbing the asymmetries of the deep interior before they can reach the surface. And then it begins to rain. Most documentaries stop at the gas and the liquid. They miss the dark jewels. Saturn's atmosphere contains methane, a simple molecule of carbon and hydrogen. In the upper layers, lightning bolts, 10,000 times stronger than Earth, shatter these molecules, freeing the carbon atoms. As this soot sinks into the abyss, the pressure and temperature mount. The soot is compressed into graphite. Then, as it falls deeper into the metallic hydrogen layer, the graphite is crushed with such violence that it transforms into diamond. This is the diamond rain. In the pitch-black, incandescent depths of the planet, billions of carats of pure carbon are drifting downward, like gemstones sinking in oil. They don't sparkle, they fall in the dark, growing larger as they descend through the liquid metal. Some models suggest that as they approach the center, the heat becomes so extreme that even the diamonds melt, forming a sea of liquid carbon, a literal ocean of melted diamond surrounding the planet's heart. But what is that heart? For decades, we were told the core was a solid ball of rock and ice, the pit inside the peach. We liked that idea because it gave the planet a foundation. But the most revolutionary discovery of the Cassini mission, the one analysed by researchers at Caltech, has shattered that comfort. By studying the way the planet quivers like a bell, scientists realized that the core is fuzzy. It is a smeared, diffuse mess of heavy elements dissolving upward into the hydrogen and helium. This fuzzy core extends out to 60% of the planet's radius. It contains 55 Earth masses of material, but it isn't a solid object. It is a sloshing, turbulent gradient where rock, ice, and metal are being eaten by the hydrogen around them. This leads us to the most unsettling realization of the entire descent. Saturn is not a thing. It is not a solid object with a gaseous shell. Saturn is a process. It is a continuous, violent transformation of matter. From the helium separating like oil from water, to the diamonds crushing in the dark, to the fuzzy core dissolving into the metallic sea, the entire planet is a sloshing, churning engine of transition. It is a world where the very definitions of solid, liquid, and gas become meaningless. When you look at Saturn from the outside, you see the jewel. You see the golden bands and the perfect rings. But now you know that the jewel is just the thin, decorative skin of a pressurized furnace. Beneath that skin, the planet is a kingdom of counterfeits, even at the atomic level. It is a world that appears light enough to float in an ocean, while hiding a core that is a sloshing, radioactive mess of dissolved worlds. We have descended into the abyss and found that there is no bottom to land on, only a gradient of increasing horror. We have seen the diamonds fall and the metal sea churn. But as we look at this dying king, we realize that the most terrifying thing about the interior isn't the pressure or the heat. It's the transience. The helium is sinking. The rings are raining. The core is dissolving. We are witnessing a snapshot of a catastrophe in progress. There is only one chapter left in this story. We have seen the predator, heard the broadcast, witnessed the murder scene in the rings, and felt the crushing weight of the interior. Now, we must ask the final question. What happens when the crown is gone? What is the ultimate fate of the most beautiful trap in the solar system? It is time to face the end. It is time for the dying king. Look at the crown one last time. Take it in. Memorize the gold, the ivory, and the charcoal bands that have defined our vision of the heavens for 400 years, because the most terrifying thing about the jewel of the solar system isn't its crushing pressure, its screaming radio signals, or its geometric nightmares. The most terrifying thing is that it is all going away. We have spent this journey exploring a kingdom of counterfeits and beautiful traps, but now we must face the ultimate truth of the predator. Saturn is not an eternal monument. It is a dying king. Every iconic image you've ever seen of this planet, every poster in a classroom, every high-resolution portrait from a multi-billion-dollar probe is nothing more than a temporary snapshot of a catastrophe. We are witnessing a brief shimmering window in cosmic time that began long after the dinosaurs took their first breath, and will close long before the sun draws its last. In the grand timeline of a 4.5 billion-year-old solar system, we are the lucky witnesses to a beautiful accident that is currently devouring itself. The rings are the primary casualty. For decades, we believed they were ancient, primordial relics of the planet's birth. We wanted them to be eternal because their perfection suggested a sense of order in a chaotic universe. But the Cassini mission delivered a bombshell that shattered that comfort. By measuring the mass of the rings and the rate at which they are polluted by interplanetary dust, we realized they are shockingly clean, as bright as fresh snow. If they were billions of years old, they would be filthy, darkened by eons of cosmic grime. Instead, they look brand new. The best science we have suggests the rings are perhaps only 10 to 100 million years old. This means that for 98% of its history, Saturn was a plain, naked gas giant. The crown is a recent acquisition, and it is already being reclaimed. Scientists have confirmed that Saturn is losing its rings at a rate they describe as the worst-case scenario. It is a process called ring rain. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun and impacts from micrometeoroids give the ring particles an electrical charge. Once they're charged, they lose their independence. They become slaves to Saturn's massive magnetic field, sliding along invisible lines of force and falling into the planet's atmosphere at mid-latitudes. At the same time, material is spiraling directly into the equator, dragged down by the combined weight of gravity and atmospheric friction. The numbers are staggering. Saturn is devouring its own finery at a rate of roughly 10 tons of material every single second. To put that in a human perspective, that is enough water to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 30 minutes. Every half hour, a piece of that magnificent crown the size of a stadium's worth of water vanishes forever into the yellow clouds. At this pace, the innermost rings, the D ring and the C ring, will be the first to go. Then the massive B ring will succumb. In less than 100 million years, a mere blink in the eyes of a planet, the crown will be gone. The jewel will return to being an anonymous, ordinary ball of gas, indistinguishable from a slightly smaller Jupiter. The beautiful trap will have finally snapped shut on itself, leaving nothing but a ringless void. But the decay isn't just external. Inside the planet, the king is reorganizing his own guts. Deep within the interior abyss, the process of helium rain is relentlessly cooling the world. Because helium doesn't mix well with metallic hydrogen at certain temperatures, it separates like oil from water and rains toward the center. This is why Saturn is too bright. It radiates 2.5 times more energy than it receives from the sun. That excess heat isn't a sign of life. It's the sound of a planet slowly settling, losing its gravitational potential energy and turning it into heat as it grows denser at its core. Even the fuzzy core we discovered, that sloshing 60% wide mess of dissolved rock and ice, is a sign of a world that is not a solid object, but a chaotic process of transition. The moons, too, are on a ticking clock. Enceladus, the moon that bleeds, only remains active because it is caught in a gravitational tug-of-war with Saturn and its neighbour, Diona. This tidal kneading keeps its internal ocean liquid, but orbits evolve, resonances shift. If Enceladus ever slips out of that gravitational lock, the friction will stop. The heat will fade, the geysers that feed the E-ring will go silent, and the hidden laboratory will freeze solid, locking whatever secrets or neighbours it might hold in a permanent tomb of ice. Titan, our counterfeit Earth, faces a similar fate. Its methane is being destroyed by ultraviolet radiation, broken down into organic smog that settles on the surface. Without a continuous source of methane from the interior, which we still haven't fully confirmed, Titan's atmosphere will eventually lose its greenhouse capacity. The orange haze will thin. The methane rain will stop. The lakes and seas will evaporate or freeze. The only world in the solar system that mimics our own weather will become a cold, inert husk. This leads us to the civilization lesson. It is the most profound and unsettling takeaway from our time at Saturn. We often think of the universe as a static map, a collection of objects that were there before us and will be there after us. But Saturn teaches us that we are living in a narrow, privileged slice of time. We are the generation that got to see the rings. We are the species that happened to evolve during the brief window when a gas giant murdered a moon to decorate its silhouette. This lesson was punctuated by a final, singular act of human ethics. On September 15th, 2017, we ended our most successful mission to the outer solar system with a ritual sacrifice. The Cassini spacecraft, which had spent 13 years peeling back the layers of this kingdom, was running out of fuel. It carried 73 pounds of plutonium-238, and more importantly, it carried terrestrial microorganisms, hitchhikers from Earth that had survived the vacuum of space. NASA faced a choice. If they left Cassini to drift, it would eventually crash into Enceladus or Titan. If those Earth microbes survived the impact, they could contaminate a pristine ocean or a rehearsal space for life. We would never know if the life we found later was native or just a ghost of our own arrival? To protect a world that might hold life, we had to destroy the only thing that could see it. We ordered Cassini to commit suicide. The spacecraft performed what we called the grand finale, a series of 22 daring dives between the planet and its rings, a region no one had ever dared to explore. On its final day, after a goodbye kiss flyby of Titan, Cassini plunged into Saturn's atmosphere at 70,000 miles per hour. It fought to keep its antenna pointed at Earth, transmitting the chemistry of the clouds until the very last second. For about a minute, the small thrusters fired continuously, struggling against the atmospheric drag, refusing to let go of the signal. And then the monster won. The atmosphere overwhelmed the machine. Cassini tumbled, the antenna swung away, and the signal that had been our eyes and ears for 20 years went flat. In the mission control room at JPL, there were tears and silence. Cassini didn't just crash, it was vaporized. Its plutonium, its cameras, its memory, everything we had sent to understand the Predator was converted into heat and incorporated into the planet's hydrogen. Cassini became part of Saturn. There is a deep irony in that sacrifice. We killed our greatest achievement to protect a world that does not care that we exist. Saturn is a ball of hydrogen and helium spinning in the dark, obeying the indifferent laws of physics. It has no purpose, it has no meaning beyond what we assign to it. It is a photogenic predator that would crush us in a heartbeat, yet we treated its moons with a level of ethical care we often fail to show our own planet. And so, we look to the far future. Trillions of years from now, long after our species is a forgotten whisper, the sun will swell into a red giant. It will consume the Earth and the inner planets. Saturn will survive this phase, but its orbit will widen as the sun loses mass. The rings will have been gone for eons by then. The geysers of Enceladus will be a memory. Saturn will be a cold, dark, ringless ghost, orbiting the dim, white dwarf remnant of our star. Eventually, gravitational perturbations from passing stars will loosen the leash. Saturn might be ejected from the solar system entirely, becoming a rogue world drifting through the interstellar void in total darkness. Or it might slowly spiral inward to be consumed by the fading white dwarf. Either way, the result is the same: silence. The screaming radio signals will stop. The hexagon will dissolve. The kingdom of counterfeits will return to the void from which it was forged. What is the final mystery? It's not the diamonds or the metallic hydrogen, it's us. We are the species that looked at a violent, unstable giant 1 billion miles away and called it beautiful. We are the ones who found a hexagon on a gas giant and spent decades trying to decode its geometry. We are the ones who measured the ring rain and realized the crown was falling. Saturn is scary because it is magnificent, and it is scary because it's dying. It reminds us that everything in the cosmos, no matter how grand, no matter how iconic, is a temporary masterpiece of gravity and violence. The beautiful trap lured us across the solar system only to show us how small we are, and how lucky we are to be looking at it right now. The crown is falling. The ghost is waiting. The silence is coming. But for one brief, brilliant moment in the history of the universe, we were here. We saw the rings, we heard the scream, and we understood the lie. Thank you for joining us in the Kingdom of Shadows. The next time you look up at that golden dot in the night sky, remember, you aren't just looking at a planet. You are looking at a crime scene, a laboratory, and a dying king. And it is much, much worse than you think.